Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of cinema, your archbishop of Banterbury, and your chancellor of cheerfulness. And lest we not forget, your existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett, coming at you, Rob-casting at you from the Robservatory. This is Robservations, the show about something, episode number 451, and I am very happy to be with all of you imagination connoisseurs today, but I have an admission to make, and I made it on Twitter last night before I went to bed, but I figured for those of you who aren't on Twitter or haven't seen Twitter, Twitter's a difficult place to be, but I figured, sometimes before bed you just have to come clean, clear your conscience. But I think I need to do it with you before you hear it from somebody else, before it becomes a controversy, before I feel that, or before you feel that I've let you down as a community. This is not to be taken lightly. I don't expect sympathy, and I don't know if I'm not offering an apology. I just want to say that I'm conflicted about what I've done, and I think we need to talk about it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Polar Lights Round 2 1/1000 scale model kit of the Enterprise, the Starship Enterprise, NCC 1701 from Star Trek Discovery. Now, as many people know, I love the Enterprise, the original Enterprise, and of course my favorite starship of all time is the refit Enterprise from Star Trek the Motion Picture. Yet, I still have a strange attachment to all Enterprises, and I feel the need to acquire them in whatever form. Now, I have not bought any other kind of Discovery merchandise myself. I own one book, David Mack's book, and nothing else. But when I saw this model, and to be fair, I hate this model. I hate this ship. I hate everything about Star Trek Discovery, but it is an Enterprise, and it is a model kit of the Enterprise. I even bought J.J. Abrams' even more horrific Star Trek 09 Enterprise, which is just god-awful. I just wanted you guys to know that I'd purchased this. I figured I'd tell you. I couldn't help myself. I hope you can find it in your hearts to understand. To understand where I'm coming from. That I saw this. They had released a 2500 scale, 2500 scale model. This is 1000 scale, so it's 18 inches long. It's a respectable size. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. I just wanted you to hear it from me before somebody brought it up. And don't think that this is changing my position on anything. I just wanted you all to know. I had to do it. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I was looking for stuff to talk about, and I keep waiting. I now have a game I'm playing with myself, which is Tenant, or let's call it Moving Tenant, or Tenant Moving, depending on, because, forward, backward, it's got to make it the same, right? I do believe that Tenant is going to move off of its July 31st date, and I play this game with myself every day. I'm not going to give you an answer because I want to hear yours. When do you think Tenet... Well, first of all, do you think Tenet's going to move? And when do you think Tenet is going to move? I think it'll probably be moved by July 1st. Could be wrong. Maybe it won't move at all. But with the theaters staying closed in China, with COVID rising around the country, especially here in Los Angeles and in Washington State, thought we had these things tamped down. We clearly did not. Please wear your masks, people. Mandatory mask wearing in Washington State again. So anyway, what do you guys think? Is Tenet going to move? When? Where? How? So with not a lot of new entertainment news, other than, come on, after Michael Keaton's coming back to the DC cinematic universe, we don't know if it's just talks, but who knows what's going to happen. But pretty exciting news. How are you going to beat that? Really no news today. Some people come, some people go. They announced a few new TV shows, but nothing really interesting. So I went to my old standbys, like, where could I find something to talk about? And, I keep thinking our moderator, the Richard's always going, why don't you talk about horror more? And horror films and horror literature are some of my favorite, maybe, it is a favorite genre of mine. So I just went looking. Anything interesting about horror today? Novels, movies, TV shows, anything? What's cooking? And on Medium, I found an article that was published today, and by a guy named Michael A. Gold. And I figured, this could be a show, or at least something I could read and share and talk about it with y'all. So I'm going to do just that. And his article is, what is horror, and what does consent have to do with it? By the way, I've got some pretty controversial letters coming up, and going to read those too. But here it is, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Gold, take it away, sir. I love horror. I love scary movies, scary video games, and haunted houses. Completely by accident, my TikTok feed has ended up being videos of people recording ghosts in their houses because the almighty algorithm had me pegged as a fan of the spooky in less than 24 hours. I spent a lot of time thinking about horror, what it means, and why we engage with it. My wife, for example, hates anything scary. She has no interest in scary movies and went with me once to a haunted trail to the Minneapolis exurbs in our first year together. I think my wife's reaction to horror is probably the more sensible one, and the more I've encountered people who want absolutely nothing to do with anything scary, the more I've been inclined to reflect on what makes horror work for me and for others like me. But in doing so, I've also learned that maybe we horror fans aren't fully on the same page. Before we go much further, it would be helpful to define what we mean when we say horror, and here is where we see the first cracks. I tend to be an inclusionist in most definitions, so I apply that to horror as well. The most succinct definition I could agree with was from literaryterms.net. Forgive me if this seems a little English 101, but if getting a bachelor's in English taught me anything, it's that asking the internet how to define a genre is just asking to read about 10 different contradictory papers, so let's keep it simple. Literaryterms.net claims that horror is a genre of fiction whose purpose is to create feelings of fear, dread, repulsion, and terror in the audience. In other words, it develops an atmosphere of horror. They go on to say that it comes from the old French horror, which means to shudder or to bristle. And yes, these pictures are from Midsummer. Now, this is important. Horror is defined by its intended effect, much as comedy is, not by its success on an individual. Additionally, that intended effect encompasses far more than simple fear. This is a point of contention for those who treat horror the same way they treat hot peppers. The more horror you consume, the less frightening it will be. But that doesn't make it not horror. Horror is not about what scares you personally. This was an argument I had with folks around the time Get Out was released. Many people didn't find it especially scary and so wanted to describe Get Out as a thriller rather than as horror. But Get Out was clearly trying to create a sense of dread and repulsion in the audience, so it makes sense to call it horror. I would add one more thing to this definition. Horror is also driven by a sense of the taboo, that what we are looking at on screen is not something we're supposed to be looking at. Let's explore the difference in these attitudes a bit more. 3 attitudes toward horror. In my time thinking about these things and in engaging with other horror fans on the internet, I feel I've been able to broadly separate people into 3 basic attitudes towards horror: aversion, reflection, and indulgence. Aversion refers to people who usually or always avoid horror. Averse people may make an exception for a horror movie that looms large in the culture, like Get Out, especially if they're encouraged that it is not too scary, but they don't seek horror out. Their actual feelings about people who do like horror range from a live and let live approach to thinking that engaging in horror itself is unhealthy. Reflection refers to people who enjoy horror but may enjoy or purport to enjoy the genre for reasons other than simply looking for a thrill. They may be more picky about what horror they watch for content reasons. I would put myself in this category. While I like a good jump scare, I'm most interested in a particular monster, killer, or threat represents. The basic element of horror, that it's scary or taboo, is still a strong motivator, but there's a reason I'm more interested in the original Dawn of the Dead than the remake. I think that the original states its themes and follows through on them in a more interesting way. In addition to being scary, it has more to say. It's the combination of titillation and meaning that attracts reflective people to horror. Indulgence. Indulgence refers to first refers to those who are all in for the thrill of the scare. What a particular movie might be trying to say, or whatever commentary it holds, might still be of interest to them, but they're really here to be scared. They want a show. They use horror as a safe place to explore the taboo, as a space where one can see killers, monsters, blood, and guts, and the worst thing that will happen to them is that they may get some popcorn stuck in their teeth. People who primarily engage in horror to be frightened or to indulge themselves with blood and gore do run the risk of desensitizing themselves, leading to a cycle where they seek out more and more extreme horror. This has spawned entire genres that seek to shock and often do little else, which is fine if that's what you need in your life. There's a great shot from the original Dawn of the Dead when Steven is about to be turned into Flyboy the zombie. What does horror do? Horror can be much more than a series of shocking displays. However, it can be a vital means of exploring the unexplorable. H. Scott Poole's book, The Wasteland, explores the connection between the rise of horror in the 20th century and the First World War. His argument broadly is that the horror, even that concerning vampires, ghosts, and other supernatural monsters, provides a means for those who lived through the war to talk about and depict the things they saw. People flocked to the movie theaters to see these images. People were working out something dark and traumatic through horror. Horror can deal with the deaths of friends, loved ones, one-night stands, and children. It can depict horrible torture and sexual assault. It can examine themes of revenge, sadism, and the will to survive. There's Nosferatu. When you go to a horror movie, you expect that you might be confronted with images that repulse you or themes that you find uncomfortable. But these are themes which are nevertheless worth exploring. Something like Candyman was never going to win an award, but it uses its supernatural killer to explore lynchings, their continued impact on black people, and the distance that white society has created between its violence and the violence of that, and the victims of that violence. Because it's a horror movie, the audience is prepared when people are stabbed or when the main character wakes up in a blood-soaked room. I think Candyman is, by the way, a terrific horror film, and Arrow did a bang-up job releasing it on Blu-ray. Horror also provides catharsis. A few years ago, I went to Eastern State Penitentiary, and there I picked up Marjorie Kerr's Scream. It's an astounding book approaching horror from a sociological point of view. Kerr is a sociologist who works for a major haunt in Pittsburgh, so her job is literally to understand horror. Though she would undoubtedly agree with Poole's thesis above on horror as a means to explore difficult topics, she also discusses the psychological nature of horror. Namely, when we're afraid, we are startled, we get a little jolt of adrenaline. Once the danger passes, we feel good. People watching horror movies scream, squirm, cover their eyes, and often laugh. Kerr observed that the brain has difficulty immediately judging the difference between real and fake danger, meaning that as things happen on screen, your brain tends to perceive them as being real. However, once it registers that there's no actual danger, your brain tries to get the whole body to relax again, which creates a pleasurable sensation. In this way, we can see how horror combines this exploration of the unexplorable with feelings of pleasure. It makes us feel strong because we're able to look death in the face and then, realizing that it isn't real, have a little laugh. While there are many people who avoid certain genres of horror or certain themes to avoid triggers they may have, there are also a lot of people who seek out horror specifically to engage their trauma. You could argue, in fact, all of Europe was doing this after the First World War. While horror is not a replacement for introspection and other therapies, it can provide a safe place to deal with unsafe things that one is afraid of or that one has experienced. Boundaries and consent. Because horror deals with taboo topics, it can lead into uncomfortable territory. Horror is pleasurable because it pushes boundaries, including boundaries of taste. However, these boundaries are only pleasurable to push when we have agreed to what boundaries are being pushed and how. I know this may upset some indulgers, but I'm talking about content warnings and trigger warnings. There's the thing. A non-horror example, when I was a sophomore in college, I took a course on African fiction. We read Half of a Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. It's a great book, worth your time, but I will warn you, my professor did not, as there is a graphic depiction of sexual assault about halfway through. When I lent the book to a friend, I mentioned this offhandedly, and she declined to read it because she didn't feel that she was in the place for that. On the other hand, 2 years later, I was in a theater class, and we were assigned to see Ruined, a play about a bar in the midst of unrest in the Congo. Our professor warned us that the play famously has a scene depicting sexual assault on stage and offered an alternative assignment for anyone who requested it, no questions asked. I was shocked by the book in the first class, but in the second instance I felt okay knowing what I was getting into. I felt like I'd agreed to see what was going to be shown to me, and while it was still shocking, I didn't feel taken out of the experience. I'm generally a proponent of spoiling the surprise if the surprise is something that may diminish someone's ability to enjoy a work of art. I know what my wife is uncomfortable. I know what my wife is uncomfortable or uncomfortable with seeing on screen, and when I do suggest a horror movie, especially during October when I'm allotted 3 to watch as a couple, I always look it up on doesthedogdie.com. This site catalogs about 30 triggers such as does the dog die, does a child die, does anything happen involving teeth, and on and on and on. I've heard some people complain that the shock and surprise is part of the experience, but I doubt these people had ever seen someone leave a movie theater because they had a panic attack. It took me right out to watch a person walk zombie-like out of a theater shaking with their boyfriend right behind them asking what was wrong as a torture scene played behind them. People go to horror movies to have boundaries pushed, but consent is essential to ensuring a good time. Horror is healthy. When consent is properly observed, when people are aware of what they are about to experience, and when everyone is clear-headed about what the next bit of time will bring, horror can be a healthy outlet. This is because horror can help us deal with difficult themes through allegorical means, but allow us to have fun while we do it. Sure, the zombies in Dawn of the Dead are a metaphor for mindless consumerism, but it's also exciting to watch them tear apart the bikers who invade the mall. Nosferatu may represent the specter of death hanging over a war-ravaged Europe, but he's also a spooky vampire. Most horror tropes speak to some kind of societal fear, whether they are the slashers of the 1970s and the 80s, standing in for a rising fear of violent crime, or Godzilla representing a growing fear of nuclear war. These are issues that deserve to be examined. We should talk about what scares us. While there is a time and place to do so very seriously, there is also a value in doing so by exploring macabre and dark images. But allowing ourselves to feel fear for someone being stalked by a killer, or by letting ourselves feel relieved when a jump scare turns out to be a cat. So think about what you want to see, what ideas you want to explore, choose carefully, but consider choosing horror. I like that article, and I had never really considered the idea of consent as it relates to horror movies. When I was a kid, when I first got my VCR, I was the only kid who had one, and in our neighborhood. And when I started getting movies, and I was 13, and I specialized in getting R-rated movies and showing them to my classmates after school. Sometimes there was 15 kids at our house, and a couple of times my mom got irate phone calls, usually from the mother of a girl, because I'd shown her Alien or something like that, and it was not cool. And I had to say, I used to revel in showing people movies, and sometimes I would go all William Castle on them and add to the scare by jumping up and screaming or something like that when I knew a jump scare was coming to accentuate the jump scare. I wouldn't do that now, but I thought that the idea of consent, of allowing people to know what they're in for. When I read it in this article, I was thinking to myself, maybe this idea of putting disclaimers or something on the front of movies might not be the horrible idea that I first thought it was going to be. I've been thinking about being an adult, and an adult should be able to make up their own decisions, which I totally agree with. Nobody should tell me what I can and can't see. But when I was reading this article today, and the reason I wanted to share it was because of this idea of consent. And I thought Mr. Gold did a pretty good job explaining about with his girlfriend. I love the fact that they have rules. In October, she will participate and watch 3 horror movies with him. I love these kind of things. I love when couples have these kinds of rules. I think that's fun. I think it's good to have. And but the idea of consent, that you should know what you're getting into. Now, you never know people's past. A lot of the time, people don't share if they have traumatic things in their past. Why would they? Why would they want to relive it? Excuse me, let me tell you about the time I suffered horrible trauma. So we don't always know what will upset people. And I think perhaps maybe in the case of horror films, the idea that they tell you, I mean, that's what our rating system is. You're supposed to pay more attention to it, that movie is rated R for these reasons, or this movie is rated NC-17 for these reasons. But when it comes to horror, I've met people that just don't like it. And I can cajole or try and get them like, come on, man. You try and convince somebody, and if they really don't want to watch it, sometimes people will relent. And then if they get upset watching whatever I choose to show them, then I'm like, oh my God, I didn't know it would upset you. And they're like, I told you I didn't want to watch this, but you pushed. You pushed. And so the idea of consent in horror was something I never really thought about. That before, if they're insecure or about what they're going to see, or they just don't know, or they're worried, it was like, what's wrong with allowing somebody to know a little bit about what they're into if they feel uncomfortable about a genre? And maybe perhaps that's not such a bad idea when we're dealing with other movies that have difficult subject matter, just to make people aware. I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing. I think it's a slippery slope. I think it's from the time you start defining, maybe not get an op-ed about something, but just to tell people what they're in for. There are these kinds of things that you're going to experience. Not necessarily. What I worry about is with labels being slapped on movies, like the PMRC was slapping labels on metal albums in the 80s. You're in a way, you're sort of doing that material a disservice because you're not allowing an adult human being to come to grips with something on their own. They don't even have an opportunity to deal with the material on its own terms. I mean, one of the things that's I've always loved the darker side of human nature. I mean, we're born to die. So if you chose to look at life that way, that we are all entropy, we are on a long, hopefully it's very long, a long slide into oblivion. And like one of the things I always loved about Cronenberg's early work, especially his body horror movies, whether it was They Came From Within, Rabid, The Brood, Scanners, Videodrome, then later on The Fly, and of course Crash. The idea that we are beings of flesh and blood, our intellect is being supported, our souls, our spirits, everything that we is being supported by these meat sacks. And our meat sacks are getting old. They're revolting against it. They're not revolting like that's revolting. I mean, they're revolting again, like in a revolt, not quite armed, but they're going to betray us at some point, whether it's through some terminal ailment like cancer or aging. Eventually, they're going to get us. And we are locked in a cycle of decay that we cannot escape from. And recognizing that, which I don't think is wrong to recognize because that is our lot in life, then when you delve into sort of the darker sides of this, I mean, for instance, the pleasures of the flesh, there's a lot of carnal desire, seduction in horror. The vampiric myth, of course, the vampires seducing the young, the beautiful, those with the life force that need to be consumed so immortality is made a little bit more bearable. I love all that. I mean, I think it's great because it's all commentaries on our lives. Horror as a genre, in a way, also, I think it's a very moral genre, even though you see serial killers with no remorse eating people, hacking people up, wearing their skin, or whatever. Usually horror is about the human spirit trying to prevail under the reality of the endless night. So in a way, it's about humanity trying to prevail where in a place where there is none. And I find that ultimately reassuring. And I like that. And that's only part of. But look, the best horror is commenting on human nature, and it does so. And I like the fantastical the elements to it, the components. But yeah, so I like this essay, and I decided to share it with you today. So there you go. What do you guys think about horror? I'd be very curious to hear. It's one of my favorite genres. Obviously, we like talking about it. There's a movie we're going to be talking about tonight on Whining About the Movies that is a science fiction film, Alex Garland's Ex Machina, but it definitely has horrific elements to it. And I look forward to talking about that. That is tonight at 7 o'clock on Whining About Movies, episode number 43 of that show. Lancelot Narayan sends in a letter. Robster, the more I listen to you and the things that come out of your trap, the more I feel I found a kindred spirit. I know from Free Enterprise you do what Friends and I do, where we use lines from films as a reference point to say what we mean. Question, what's your personal coolest instance of this? Okay, a couple of examples. I was once in a clinch with a girl when she said, "I'm beginning to like you." To which I replied, "Well, what on earth are we going to do about that?" I don't need to explain what happened next. I once worked with another girl. Every day we would row. I mean, explosive arguments. She thought her shit didn't stink and she was really up herself. I love that. She was really up herself. That's a nice British term. She would actually say things to me like, "Oh, you couldn't possibly understand the urgency of art." It was red rag to a bull. Anyway, one day she comes in wearing a gorgeous scarf, beautiful colors, fine silk. I told her how much I admired it. She told me that her friend's mother brought it back for her from Afghanistan. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, so I took it. I held the scarf close to her face and said, "Kiesta." "What does that mean?" she asked. I replied, "It means beautiful in Afghan." I don't need to explain what happened next. One other line that comes in pretty handy is when I want to get out of a sticky situation. I always say, "Honey, who's the best pilot you ever saw?" It doesn't ever work, but I always feel better after having said it. Over to you, brother Lancelot. Well, oh man, I mean, your question is, what is my personal coolest instance of this? Dude, there's so many cool instances. I can't. There's so many I could use or remember. So many, but I'll tell you the first time I ever used a line from a movie on a girl without her knowing. And I knew that it was all about the delivery. So it was in high school, and one of my favorite lines in a movie that I always wanted to use, and it's not that it's a good line, but it's the way it was done. And that's what I loved about it. And it's in Videodrome. It's in David Cronenberg's Videodrome, where Max Wren is on TV with Debbie Harry's Nikki Brand, and they're talking about stimulation and all of that. They're having this erudite conversation, and Max Wren, James Woods' character, breaks all sense of decorum, and live on TV, his thought, he just breaks into his thought, and he goes to Debbie Harry, he goes, "I'd really like to take you out to dinner tonight." And the way he did it was clearly obvious that she was so captivating to him that he couldn't keep his mind on what he was doing. And that was, by the way, I didn't do it very well. But I always wanted to do that. I always wanted to be in a position where I could say that. And, I was in high school, and I had given this girl that I was particularly enamored of a ride home. And I didn't really know her. We were getting to know each other, and it was after newspaper class. And we were just talking. We ended up talking on a driveway for like an hour because, as I said, we didn't know each other personally. And after that hour, I laid that out. I dropped that line. I'd really like to take you out to dinner tonight. And it worked. It worked. I think at the time, I thought about dropping it, but it worked. And the break, but you have to mean it. You have to have true, total conviction. And it worked. And she said, "I would like that. And why don't you pick me up at 7 o'clock? And so I went home. It was like 4 o'clock then. I went home and went to dinner with her. But that was the first time I ever used a movie line. But it wasn't so much the line as it was the whole thing. It was the whole, you had to sell the idea that she was so captivating to you that no matter the conversation that you were having, you had to break out of that, and you had to drop that line, but the sentiment had to come through. So I don't think it's so much the line. When you say, like, who's the best pilot you ever saw, of course, that's Gordo Cooper from Right Stuff. That's Dennis Quaid. And I don't know if that would necessarily work, because people are like, "Are you a flyer?" But by saying, "I'd really like to take you out to dinner tonight," the sentiment was there. The right thing was there, because it was something if I made some obscure Star Wars reference, it would have fallen flat. It wouldn't have worked. But there you go. I think a lot of us in the Post-Geek Singularity, we talk to each other in movie language shorthand. So, okay. This letter, I'm going to read this letter. I've been struggling over this letter, because normally the whole point of the show is every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. Now, I don't even want to necessarily give this letter a disclaimer, but I think I should. It's a controversial letter. It's a controversial topic, but it does refer back to what we've been talking about. Should any actor be allowed to play any character? Which is something many people keep writing about. It's an ongoing theme. And this comes from someone I'd never received a letter from before. And this comes from Marnie Rutland. Hi. On the trans versus cis thing, Walter Hill had an interesting movie called The Assignment, where Michelle Rodriguez played initially a cis male hitman who kills a relative of a doctor, Sigourney Weaver, who, out of revenge, gives him a sex change. So the actress in the same film has to play a straight cis male and then a trans female, two things that she is not. How could Walter Hill have placated everybody? By casting a cis male actor so committed that he was willing to film the beginning and then endure a sex change — we won't call it gender confirmation surgery if it's just for a movie role. Since I don't spend a lot of time on Twitter, I heard via some of your YouTube peers about the publisher for J.K. Rowling's upcoming book having staff members walk out because they objected to what she tweeted around June 6th. My first thought was that I remember the dread I felt when newspapers began citing tweets as their source. The second thought was that a similar walkout happened with the original publisher of Woody Allen's memoir, was supposed to have, and if I were either one of those publishers, I would have used a walkout and its implied disparagement of a writer to clean house. No doubt this comes from graduates of the safe space college era. I scrolled through all the kids' drawings that dominate J.K. Rowling's Twitter, and I found the discussions of June 6th. Initially, at issue was her comment under an article that referred to people who menstruate. She quipped something like, there should be a word for that, like woman. Even a pair of actors who owe their fame to her decided to contribute admonishment, like the enforced stance trans women are women. I've heard you say as much, and this equation would not be controversial, except for the last few years we've had the term cis shoved down our throats because it was so important to distinguish trans women from one who simply got the XX chromosome at conception instead of XY. Certainly, trans women are women doesn't factor into the conversation about Scarlett Johansson. In practical terms, it's one thing to say trans women are people, and we want them to enjoy life and not commit suicide, as so many people do after sexual reassignment. But in practical terms, all things being equal, are we confident enough that trans women are women that we can eliminate cis or trans distinctions on an internet dating site form? Can college professors carry on without worrying they can be sanctioned or lose their jobs for misgendering someone if there is no such thing as gender distinction? In the eyes of Mother Nature, all humans must be of equal value. But a sure way to detract from that value is for someone to swarm a public figure or anyone else and campaign for their cancellation because they disagree or because they will not read the enforced script. The Wachowskis gave us outstanding examples of directing skill with Bound and The Matrix. But I admit, come on man, Speed Racer. But I admit any enthusiasm the prospect of Lana Wachowski coming out with The Matrix 4 is tempered with trepidation about the sensibilities that she brings in her new life. As you have stated, a filmmaker can't be an activist. Well, you can. I mean, they can be an activist, but your agenda should never supersede your characters or your story. Your characters and your story must be true to themselves. Having seen the first 8 episodes of Sense8, I thought some of it was entertaining, but it also felt very in-your-face, as if charging a tax for anyone who came for the action. They had to wade through the stuff that Victoria Jackson would openly say, ew, over. Since I can take it or leave it, I just didn't get around to finishing it. Episode 8 felt like resolution enough. If Matrix 4 stays on the course for opening the same weekend as John Wick 4, that would chop their respective box office in half. I'd likely choose John Wick because we need to see the adjudicator killed. Now, if that makes me a bad person, fine, but I'd reject transphobic because to be truly afraid would be to say nothing to the enforced narrative. I have to respect J.K. Rowling for speaking what people like to call her truth, even if I just checked her Twitter now and most of the controversial discussion seems to be gone. I also had a bit of a back and forth when someone posted an article about trans sex workers demonstrating during COVID. I asked something flip like whether they are essential workers or practicing social distancing. Someone with a BLM handle said something sarcastic about them working at Target now. I asked if their clients' lives mattered. They deflected by shifting blame to the Johns and laughing at my use of the word client. Fair enough, but the question remains. The posture of moral superiority in people who consider themselves a victim class is dangerous because of the once accepted as science principle that a victim may eventually act out as an abuser or attacker. We see some of that energy via social media. I appreciate the mentions of The World According to Garp and John Lithgow's performance as Roberta Muldoon. It's a solid movie, well worth checking out. Well worth anyone checking out. So the subject matter is not a deal killer. But I don't know if anyone reads a book or sees a movie or gets excited to support a casting decision just because it's good for society or because it helps prop up a group that feels marginalized. If the percentage of people who are trans is relatively marginal compared to the general population, then I don't see how they can be marginalized, even if there is a gut feeling of discomfort having to call out anyone in the underdog position. The theory that makes sense is that once same-sex marriage rights were won federally in the United States, the lobbying infrastructure still existed and then turned their focus to the trans issue. My guess is that the average person has no quarrel with transgendered people. I have assumed the Republicans invented the washroom controversy. But hearing a disproportionate ongoing grind of messaging in social media, an overreach of sorts, might have worn thin with people, and it might have contributed to the rise of the Trumpster fire. With Silence of the Lambs criticized yet again for being transphobic, it is worth remembering that the film actually spoon-feeds from Clarice and also from Hannibal himself distinctions between transgenerated people and what James Gumb really is. When Basic Instinct introduced a bisexual backstory for a character, activists got a leak of the script and demanded that Michael Douglas say a line to the effect of, "Not that there's anything wrong with that," despite being an anti-hero and not a role model. I'd like to think Seinfeld properly retired that disingenuous line, but apparently not. Marnie Rutland. Marnie, an interesting, if controversial letter, I would say. But, I thought it was well written, and you did touch on a lot of subjects that we've spoken about. I mean, my feeling about all of this is I've been thinking about this a lot, like the trans issue with Scarlett Johansson, and like you all know my opinion. I mean, if people want to be considered, I do believe that any kind of differences in humanity, like my LGBTQ brethren, they're naturally occurring. It's the way God made them, and there's probably will, as we know more and more about science and the human mind and all that, we'll eventually be able to actually pinpoint that and prove that it's true. I believe that. I believe it's true. With a lifetime of knowing all kinds of different people, I do believe that it is naturally occurring. And I think that, we have issues when people are mental illness is one thing, but I really believe that there are people that their minds are not properly connected to their physical bodies. And I think it's because of biology. It happened naturally and it occurred. And I think we're getting, we get too caught up in this idea about that, hey, if you have to make alterations to sort of bring those two disparate items together, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I just don't think our society has progressed far enough to deal with it as we should. And it doesn't matter whether there's one person or 100 people or 1,000 or 10,000 or 1 million or 10 million. It doesn't matter. every person should be able to get the kind of sympathy or help or not sympathy that they want, that they desire. And I think that what we need to do as a civilization is we need to learn to understand that human beings, there's a diverse group of us, and all kinds of people, and we just need to accept the fact that there's more than just our simple categories that we have been told about since the dawn of time. Now, do I believe that there's an infinite spectrum of genders? I don't. But I do think it's all variations on a theme. But I do think that these issues about representation and people that have been, we know they've been marginalized because they have been. Their voices haven't been heard. The suicide rates are there. And I don't see why our society isn't just more sympathetic in general. Why don't we just have more empathy for people, no matter who they are? And if people want to be a certain way, as long as you're not infringing on the rights of someone else. But I don't understand why there isn't more support to help people be the people that they want to be, that they need to be. On the other hand, that said, when it comes to an actor playing a part, I still think all kinds of actors should be allowed to play all kinds of parts. It doesn't make sense to me that acting, which is a profession that is based on pretending, that you need people that aren't pretending to come in and play parts. It doesn't make sense to me. But that said, I'm also the viceroy of verisimilitude. So the people that I would want to cast or want to see in roles are the people that most convince me that they can play the part. And that's it. That's kind of how I view it. But I like this ongoing discussion. It's been one of the more interesting ongoing discussions we've had on the show, and a lot of people. There's more letters to that effect coming up. So this next one comes from Pablo Contreras. Contreras. Take it away, Pablo. Greetings once again from Mexico City, Rob. Thank you so much for taking my last letter a few weeks ago and for the interesting feedback on the movies I brought up. I've been busy for the last week and took the weekend to catch up on the week's Robservations. There's little that I enjoy doing more in the quarantine than firing up my PC, playing some retro Star Wars games, Call of Duty, or just cleaning my room and doing my chores while listening to Robservations on the TV. I wanted to share something that has been on my mind for the last week, and I can't seem to figure it out. Sorry, by the way, I meant to write you with a bunch of Star Trek questions, and still will. I just needed to get this off my chest. Right now, I'm entering my senior year of high school, which starts in August, if everything goes right. Before starting my senior year, though, this quarantine has allowed me to finally do something that I've been putting off for a few months, actually planning and thinking about my future. I don't know why, but thinking about what university to attend and what to study has for a long time freaked me out, and I'm finally facing it. I don't know if I want to stay here close to home, where it's safe, go to one of the best schools in Mexico 15 minutes away from here, still sleep in my comfy room where I can watch all the movies that I want, talk to the same people, hang out at the same places, etc., etc. Safe, good, but at the same time, kind of boring. There is an appeal for everything to stay home. There's an appeal for everything to stay the same, but there's also a huge appeal to just going away, meeting new people, discovering new places, and taking some risk. Going to the States or to Europe, Canada is something that really interests me, just as much as it scares the living crap out of me. As a foreigner, you watch all these American shows and movies, and you will see these kids getting their letters saying they've been accepted to a certain university and go on to have crazy, life-changing experiences. And as a young foreigner, you watch all of that and think, I want that. But for me at least, I also love home, and leaving is really frightening. The second dilemma I can't seem to figure out is what to study. For the last 5 years, I've completely immersed myself in the world of movies, with shows like yours and other movie-related content really helping me channel this love for storytelling that I think a lot of members of the Post-Geek Singularity can also relate to. Naturally, when thinking about what I want to study, I think movies. I want to do movies. However, I think all of us, and probably especially you, Rob, know how difficult that can be and how tough the business actually is. When the thought of studying film or any related career pops into my head, the cynic and the negative voice in my head starts taking over. What if I fail? Presuming that I have a family in the future, I have to take care of them. What if the checks don't start coming in and the bills start to pile up? On the other hand, I'm also as big a fan of sports, just as I am a movie fan, and I'm also a huge technology geek, politics nerd, along with a bunch of other fields I think I can excel at and work on in the future. I guess what I'm saying is that there are so many things in the world, and it scares the shit out of me to have to choose one or narrow my focus a bit when so many things interest me. It also scares the shit out of me to leave home, and staying seems too safe. What if I go away and I don't fit in? What if I stay and regret it for the rest of my life? What if I choose to go into movies or any other field and eventually fail? What if I don't go to the movies and regret that I never pursued that for the rest of my life? I wanted to know what your thoughts are on all of this, and specifically, what is your story and how did you figure out what you were going to do? Did you always know, or how did you figure it out? Whatever I decide, I'll be sure to give you an update in the near future. I also apologize for this letter being too long and not really related to movies and more about me, but I promise my next letter will include a bunch of Star Trek questions coming from someone who knows next to nada about the series. I cannot express how grateful I am to you for taking my letters and to this community in general. Thanks, mi amigo. Sending all the love and support to you, Elizabeth, the dogs, and the rest of the Post-Geek Singularity from Mexico City. Well, Pablo, a fantastic letter, sir, and I appreciate you writing in. Here is my advice, and like all advice, you should take it with a grain of salt. Let's say that you want to go and you want to make movies, and that is the thing that you want to do. You need something to make movies about. You know, I met a lot of people even 30 years ago in film school. They'd watched a lot of movies, but they hadn't lived. So when they would write scripts and things, you would hear echoes of other movies they'd seen, but you'd feel little about them because there was not enough real life mixed in. And I would assume, because you live in Mexico, that you speak fluent Spanish, and I assume because of the way you write, you're also a fluent English language speaker. What I would do, if I were you, is have adventures. You know, do what Frances McDormand said to in Almost Famous. You got to get out there and live, man. You've got to go have adventures, and the best time to do it is when you're still young. And if you're bilingual, dude, go to Spain. Go to Spain. Maybe not your first 2 years. You do the same thing. Like, if you don't want to have massive shock, culture shock, or whatever, stay at home, acclimate to school, get into the groove, start exploring what college has to offer you, but plan on your junior year at least spending that year abroad, maybe 2 years. I'm telling you, the one thing that I regret most in my life is not traveling more when I was in college and in my younger days, because there is a freedom that you are afforded, especially when you're studying abroad. You're going to meet people. You know, you're going to find, and maybe this is a cliche, but one of the things that I love about going to Europe, and you know, I've been going to Europe now for 20 years. One of the things I love about going there is that the culture and the people that you meet are used to traveling, and they're used to meeting strangers from different places. So they love it for the most part. They love meeting people from other places. And especially, I mean, Spain is a very warm and welcoming country. I love the people in Spain, and they have a certain joie de vivre. For me, that party atmosphere, that party vibe, like you'd go out in Barcelona, you'd run into people, you start meeting people, you never knew where you were going to wind up. You just didn't know. And there was an excitement there, and you really connect with people. And what's really amazing is you can, if you're in Spain and say you're in Barcelona, you can jump on a train and you can get into France fairly quickly. And suddenly you're in a different country with all kinds of different customs and different languages and different food and different ladies. And I'm telling you, you know, spend time in college, go abroad, because whatever you're going to do, whether you're interested in technology, whether you're interested in sports, whether you're interested in filmmaking, the broader your perspective on the world, the better off you will be. God knows America could use a lot more broadening their horizons. We are the most navel-gazing, myopic people in the world. But you know what? The best thing that you can do is travel. Go have adventures. Learn things. Get a new perspective. And you know what? Being scared's fine. But with technology the way it is, you're going to carry a supercomputer in your pocket. You can call your mom up and FaceTime her, or your dad, or your siblings, or your best friends, or whoever's you've left behind. You can talk to them like they're in the next room. There is no excuse not to go have adventures in the world. And I would say to you, it will serve you no matter what you decide to do in the future, to have that perspective. And by the way, when you go abroad, you meet people that you will stay in touch with. I mean, every place I've gone, whether it's Israel, whether it's Bulgaria, whether it's Switzerland, Denmark, whatever, there's people you meet there, and that with the technology the way it is, they'll be friends of yours for the rest of your life. You'll keep in touch with them, when you go back to Europe, or they'll come visit you, and it's something that I cannot stress enough. Don't sweat it. It's going to come anyway. What you want to do is you can get as well educated as you can, but you also need to have a broad perspective. And the more people you meet, the more cultures you get to see, but more importantly, the more life you get to experience, you are going to be a much happier, well-rounded person. And if you decide to go into films, you'll have stories to tell that are based on your own life experience. And that will serve you better than just staying home where it's safe. So, just my 2 cents. Your mileage may vary, especially if you go to Europe, which you should do. I would go to Spain. Emil Johansson is here, our man Emil. Rob, I wanted to talk about Bill Maher. I'm not going to mention politics, but even though it's pretty old now, I wanted to discuss his comments about comic books and comic book movies. Goddamn right, Emil. First of all, I like Mr. Maher. I've never met him. I don't know anything about American politics, and my first introduction to him, that's for people who don't know, Emil lives in Sweden. First of all, I like Mr. Maher, and I've never met him. I don't know anything about American politics. And my first introduction to him was not an easy one, as it was his mockumentary, Religulous, which I downloaded illegally since I'm a millennial. I watched that when it came out in 2008 or something. I was 15 and a Christian. I'm not a Christian anymore, but that's beside the point. Point is, I like Mr. Maher, and I read all of his comments about comic books and movies when he got crap for it after Stan Lee died. I disagreed with him completely. But instead of throwing a tantrum, I want to discuss as to why I disagree with him and why he is fundamentally wrong. First of all, I never grew up in the generation where people were bullied because they were dorks. I was close to the generation, but I grew up with Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, and nobody bullied you for liking that. Anime and manga were still a little weird, but nowadays even that seems to be normal for people in younger generations. I remember a librarian told me that they sold Harry Potter books for adults too, but with black covers, so that nobody would know adults were reading children's books. And she thought that was stupid. And I agree with her. People shouldn't be ashamed for being into pop culture. I've read comments such as, I would burn all of the manga in the world for another important social piece here. As you have said, we have seen a world where people dictate what is acceptable culture and what is not, where people burn books that are not in their narrative. That's not a pretty world. And if people seriously believe eradicating silly fiction would bring about some kind of enlightenment, they are seriously wrong. I also heard Bill Maher blame comics for Trump. This view of seeing comics as a bad influence on people is also flawed. Here's the truth. Comics and other pop culture phenomenon, such as their movie counterparts, are real industries with talented artists and writers that work hard to do something that people genuinely appreciate. And this isn't simple. Not anyone can do this, and I feel Stan Lee felt guilty about not being a doctor or an engineer. But what he did was a real job, and it was an important job. And I say this because I want to work with pop culture, and I don't need to be guilt-tripped. Because people like comics, well, that gives them value. I didn't even grow up with them myself, but because people like them, I can understand they matter. I'm glad I didn't grow up in the world that Bill Maher is a part of, where people get bullied for being nerds. My last say is that a comic book is also an industry that makes money. And as you have pointed out, it's now people like Snyder and Feige or Nolan and Singer, they're taking these things seriously, and the movies make a lot of money. They recognize it's not just cape shit that needs to teach kids certain values or be changed because it's silly nonsense. Because these people know these stories matter to people, they're able to do something valuable with them. That's a real skill. Bill Maher couldn't do that. I also want to bring up something I think you will disagree with, and it's the constant bickering about younger generations. I don't think older people are smart for criticizing younger generations, and this is because people did the exact same thing with the exact same arguments in ancient Greece. I'm glad younger generations are embracing nerd culture without contempt, and I'm glad the times they are a-changin'. I don't need Mr. Maher to agree with me. If I ever by some strange reason met him, I would try and talk to him about this because I think it's interesting. But, long story short, he's fundamentally wrong in my opinion, and if he wants to make such ridiculous claims as to blame Trump for comic books, he should offer more explanations to back up his claims. Emil Johansson. Well, Emil is a longtime member of the Post-Geek Singularity. A thoughtful letter. I very much appreciated that, sir. I think Bill Maher, it was definitely a throwback opinion. I mean, I have to say, I like Bill Maher too, if for no other reason than he at least tries to have political discourse in this country, and he does offer his platform to bring people that he objects to or might object to him on. There aren't a lot of mainstream political shows on TV, and it's been going for a very long time. So, look, I know a lot of people. I saw an editorial, his last new rule last week, I thought was pretty disgusting. I hated it. So I don't by any means allow myself, I don't love Bill Maher, but I do appreciate the fact that he has this forum and he's allowing people to come on and speak. And it's very interesting that what does he do? He tries to foster some kind of political debate. And I know there are people that are, oh, come on, Rob, he's a progressive leftist or whatever. But still, he's out there like Joe Rogan is, out there, people who are, these people that have long form or forms where they're bringing people on and allowing them to talk is rare because you can sit down and make up your own mind. And that's one of the things I think is important. So, Emil, I want to thank you for writing in that letter. I very much appreciated it. I have many Ian Samuels letters, but I wanted to read this one in particular today. I didn't read it yesterday. I thought I was going to, but so there you go. Ian Samuels, take it away. Rob and fellow Robservationists, today I would like to tell you and fellow members of the Post-Geek Singularity about 3 horror films. Some say it could be the first horror trilogy, but that isn't strictly true, but I will come back to that. It's also a Jewish legend, the Golem. According to the legend, a small Jewish village had been suffering attacks from raiders, and so the rabbi molds the Golem from clay and with some ancient secret Jewish magic awakens it so that it can defend the village. But the Golem is frustrated at being used and goes on a rampage throughout the village. In 1915, the first film directed and starring Paul Wegener as the Golem. It was a German, I'm sure I mispronounced that, Wegener? Dieter, you're going to have to correct me on this. It was a German film, so originally Der Golem and The Golem outside Germany, except in the U.S. where it was titled The Monster of Fate, because God forbid they would have to have a movie where a Jewish monster was the headliner back in the day. The plot of the film has the Golem being discovered in the 20th century by a trader named Trodler, played by co-director Heinrich Galeen. The Golem awakens, falls in love with the trader's wife, and goes on a murderous rampage as his love remains unanswered. The second film was released in 1917. It was The Golem of the Dancing Girl. This is where things get odd, as this is not a sequel to the 1915 original, but a comedy horror spoof of the original. In this film, with the same cast and crew, Paul Wegener plays himself, dressing up as the Golem for a joke. Wow, I didn't know that. I've only seen the Golem. The final part of the trilogy is in fact a prequel called The Golem, How He Came into the World, telling the original Jewish legend with the rabbi molding the Golem out of clay, was released in 1920. So, a film loosely based on a Jewish legend, a sequel which is in fact a parody, and a prequel. Unfortunately, all 3 films are among the lost films of the silent era, but I thought it was still an interesting topic. I've seen some of the Golem, and It was not in great shape, but I didn't even know that it had these other 2 movies. That's very, very, very interesting. Well, thank you for that, Mr. Samuels. I like learning from you. Dean Mikitich, all the way from the UK. Dean is here. Dean says, "Hi, Rob, in the Post-Geek Singularity. Sorry, I forgot to ask this in my last letter on your answer to film royalties, though this question has nothing to do with that. When you answered my original question, you talked a little bit about extras on DVDs and Blu-ray. We all know that the studios don't see the extras adding value to the physical release, so they are unwilling to spend the money on them like they did in the early days of DVD, which is why the quality and quantity have dropped in recent years. The Marvel films have been bare bones when it comes to extras. However, I've been told that Disney Plus does have stuff with the films that was never included on the physical media. I don't know about most people liking the extras that are found on physical media, but I would say it's a good bet that the majority of the Post-Geek Singularity loves them. So there is a demand. So, Rob, with Disney putting extras onto their streaming service, can you also see the other streaming services following Disney's lead? Also, with the studios removing or altering films so as not to be offended, and therefore a new demand for physical media going up in recent weeks, let's hope that continues, can you see extras making a return to the early days of DVD and be packed full of content with future releases? Kind regards, Dean M. Well, as many of you know, I've been involved with producing DVD extras for the last 20 years. And coincidentally, and most recently, I, of course, produced, along with director Dave Parker, 6.5 hours of special features on The Hills Run Red Blu-ray, out now from Scream Factory. Of course, this is a movie that I produced and Dave directed that came out in 2009 that, for whatever reason, never made it to Blu-ray until last week. So thank you, Scream Factory. Now, here's something interesting about this movie that I will use to illustrate my point. So, when we were making The Hills Run Red back in 2009, we did have an EPK crew for a day, which was unusual, but they weren't paying for any kind of special features. Now, an EPK crew is an electronic press kit crew. So, what they used to do, what EPKs used to be, was they would do interviews with stars. And they would ask these questions. Now, you wouldn't see the interviewer. And so the EPK, the electronic press kit, would be sent out like on a 3/4 inch tape back in the day. And you get like 10 different clips of the star. And then the local TV stations could cut in their own correspondent on the other side asking the question. So it would look like a star would sit down with their local news crew and they would have a conversation. And they would send them out all over the country. And that would also come with maybe a trailer or behind the scenes, some B-roll or a scene from the movie or something that they would use for publicity. That was what an electronic press kit was. So then they would have an EPK crew out to movie sets, and they would work for a couple of days. And they would do the same thing. They would shoot behind the scenes. They would shoot interviews with the crew. And some of the cast, and I mean mostly the cast, and then some of the crew, like the director or something, and they would send those out. That still goes on. EPK stuff goes on, and most of the Blu-ray special features that you see now are done by an EPK crew. They'll go and shoot all this stuff, and then they'll use all of this for the same purpose. The problem that I found working with EPK crews when I started producing on my own back in 2001 was that the questions that are asked, the EPK interviews, are pretty useless because they offer no insight into the filmmaking process. It's like, tell me about your character. Well, I play blah, blah, blah. Well, for DVD special features, that doesn't work because we already know what they played. We're very familiar with the movie. We want insight into how it gets made. So what I did for the very first time, it was actually on X-Men 2, just X2. It was the first time I did this. I had asked the unit publicist. A unit publicist is the person that they hire a unit publicist who does all the publicity for a movie when it goes into production and all the way through its release. Dedicated publicist that only handles that film. Might handle other movies at the same time, but every movie has a unit publicist. And the unit publicist, a lot of the time, would be in charge or actually conduct the EPK interviews. So what I did, what I learned early on, is I said, look, I got to become friends with the unit publicist. So on X-Men 2, I said, listen, would it be possible if I could sit down after the EPK interviewer and then also have at least a half an hour to talk to the crew and specifically the actors and ask my questions? And they were very accommodating. And so X-Men 2 was the first movie when I would go back and forth to the set that I actually was able to sit down with the whole cast and interview them. And it was much better because I was asking more detailed questions and things that would be of more interest to those interested in getting in a deeper dive into the film. So that's kind of how I started. And then I insisted upon that. And it was difficult. Sometimes I met a guy who was really giving me resistance at first, the unit publicist on Chronicles of Narnia, Ernie Malick, who turned out to be a wonderful guy. Love the guy. But at first there was some static between us because he was like, he didn't get it. He didn't understand because he's a great unit publicist, but he didn't know. And I finally convinced him. I took him out to a very expensive dinner. I said, look, man, I need to work with you. And so he said, well, okay, can I deal? And I hired an EPK crew because I had a huge budget for many days. I didn't just bring him on because I wanted to we were shooting stuff, but I also wanted the EPK crew who they can shoot a little bit more elegant, a little bit more TV ready. We were running and gunning and stuff, so I really wanted to get some beautiful footage, so we did that. But it was a lot of fun. And it's now 20 years later. The problem is it's all about money. And they realized at first the DVD format was so explosive and it made so much money and people couldn't buy DVDs fast enough that the studios thought that the more stuff we put on them, they will make more money. The more extras. That's why they were willing to throw hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, these were days when the getting was good. I would get 6-figure budgets, sometimes 7-figure budgets. I mean, it was amazing. It was an amazing time. But what happened was, and I hate to say it because I'm using my own bad self as an example, what I learned was what I learned on Superman Returns. Walmart ended up selling almost 50% of all the physical media in the world. The DVDs at this time. So in 2006, when Superman Returns was going to come out on Blu-ray, and DVD, first DVD, then Blu-ray, I'd shot thousands of hours of footage for Superman Returns, and we were going to do a 3-disc special edition. So we were going to basically do a 6-hour documentary. And Walmart said, nope, we only want 2 discs. We don't want 3 discs. And it turned out that Warner Brothers released what we call a vanilla-only version of a movie, which means it just has the movie on it, no special features. And then we had the 2-disc special edition. And what Walmart does is they get the single disc only, they put it on end caps, and they're like $6.99. They sell it below cost as a loss leader. They get people in the store, they have people, it's a point of purchase thing, they buy it. And it turned out that Superman Returns, I mean, I was 2 years of my life. Superman Returns, the vanilla only, the movie only, no special feature version of the film outsold the special features, the special edition, 8-2. So only 20% of the people that bought Superman Returns on disc wanted the special features. And you know what? That was true of pretty much everyone. And while studios were only making it sometimes special editions, they knew that, well, there's only at most 20% of the population that cares about special features. Now, I know that's true, and none of us are those people. All of us imagination connoisseurs love watching movies. We do. We love watching our special features. We can watch documentaries. We love all that. We make up 20% or less of the population, and that's just a fact. And I think, to be honest, too, I think people who came of age or who watched a lot of DVDs, once you've seen, movie making is pretty much the same. Now, you might use different technology. We now have stagecraft that Lucasfilm is employing to make The Mandalorian. All that's great. Stagecraft to me is Introvision, but better. Introvision, which they use for on Stand By Me and Outland and all those. They're just tools. And really what people want is, they want to hear wacky stories about stuff that happened on set and all that. But I just think that we're over it. And I hate to say it, because I was lucky doing the Star Trek The Next Generation Blu-ray restoration. I got to work for 3 years doing documentary. I love doing documentaries because I get to sit down and talk to people about making movies, which means I learn. It's like going back to school. So I just don't think we're ever going to have that back, unfortunately. Which is a bummer. Hi, Rob. Congrats on episode 450. Oh, one more thing to say. While we did get paid by Shout Factory to make the Hills Run Red special features, I mean, it basically covered our expenses. They don't have those budgets. Scream Factory got 6.5 hours of new special features from us because it was our movie. And I had shot all this material and oversaw this material getting shot, and I'd conducted all the interviews with the cast. I had used only little snippets of those interviews, but I went back in. I had 30 hours of footage that had never been seen, that I had been directly responsible for, and I'd shot a lot of it. So I wanted to get it out there. So it was work of mine that was sitting on a shelf that no one had ever seen, and now it's out in support of the film. And I think, in a way, I've been carrying these tapes around, moving them around. They've been in the same shelf over there for 11 years, but now for me it was closure. I'm like, okay, I can now finally purge this from my system, and I feel like everything I've ever wanted out there about the Hills Run Red is now out there. And so it was that was why we did. It certainly wasn't, the money was nice, it was great, but it certainly was nothing to write home about, and it certainly did not cover a fraction of the editorial time, the work that Dave and I put in. So I mean, not when I say a fraction, it was about 5%. If I were doing the same thing in 2003, it would have been, well, a lot more. A lot more. When I say a lot more, like 20 times more. But that's okay. I was happy with it, and it was great. Thank you, Scream Factory, for letting us put all that stuff out there. Omar is here. Omar94 is here. Congrats on episode 450. I'm not sure about you, but to me, love stories in most movies are where there's a lack of verisimilitude. What I mean is, most movies with love stories often have characters fall in love and end up together way too early. Even for movies I like, I still think to myself how the love stories were done too quickly. For example, I really like the movie Somewhere in Time, but Richard and Elise fall in love in just one day. In Pretty Woman, Edward and Vivian fell in love in about a week. Disney does this the most, as most of their movies have the male and female protagonists fall in love in a day or so. In Snow White, Cinderella, and Sleeping Beauty, all three women fall in love with the three princes after spending very little time together, and then they end up married by the end of those movies. In Little Mermaid, Ariel saves Eric after the ship sinks and is instantly in love, even though Eric doesn't know who she is. When Triton confronts her, she tells him, "You don't know him," which makes no sense since Ariel doesn't really know Eric that well either. But then she yells, "Daddy, I love him," which made even less sense. Eventually, Eric and Ariel meet, and after spending a day together, they're in love. Come on, man, did you see Ariel? Hubba hubba. They get married after that. In Aladdin, he meets Jasmine, and they spend a few hours together, leading them to be attracted to one another. After they meet again and go on the carpet ride, they kiss. Anyway, Jasmine and Aladdin meet. After Jafar is defeated, they love each other, which is way too early. In Beauty and the Beast, Belle and the Beast spend a day together, which leads Beast to letting Belle go and rescue her father instead of staying in the castle because he loves her somehow. Also, Belle tells Beast she loves him when he dies near the end, but don't end up as a couple, which made sense. In Disney's Tangled, Rapunzel and Eugene don't get married at the end, but become a couple, which was more believable, as there was a short film that was released a year or so after Tangled came out called Tangled Ever After, which showed their wedding. Anyways, I'm going on and on. It's just that love stories in most movies happen way too fast for me. I just feel there's a lack of verisimilitude in that area. Thanks, and live long and prosper. Omar94. Well, I think you're right about that, but, it's hard to show all courtship. I love When Harry Met Sally because, I love that movie, but I love that it does show that time. But, it's you got to get into those romantic travails. So if people fall in love in a day, they kind of have to, because movies would, can you imagine? Every movie would be like Berlin Alexanderplatz, which is 15 hours long or something. You couldn't do that. But hey, here comes another controversial letter, and Felipe Abrigio writes in. Hey Rob, listening to you on these rainy days here in Chile. By the way, it is actually raining because it's winter here. I'm not sure how the language is applied there in the USA, but for me, trans women are just trans women. I don't understand why someone should call them woman, since being a trans woman isn't bad. but it's confusing. For me, they're not just women, as I'm a heterosexual man, so I can't see them as women. They're just a different kind of woman. I have absolutely nothing against them, but let me be clear, but the difference cannot and should not be ignored. I find it interesting that some people delete the term trans when referring to trans women. It's like saying gay men are just men. I guess it depends on the context, of course. If we should call heterosexual people heterosexual men or heterosexual women is okay. Impractical, but okay, I guess. We're different things, equally human and all worthy of respect, but different. Differences make us great. This is just my opinion. I don't want to offend anyone. Just a quick question. Based on the current subject of female actresses playing trans women characters and some people insisting on canceling them, if trans women can play women, what is the problem with women playing trans women characters? It's a bit absurd in my opinion, since if we use that logic, it's like saying that women can't play women. If trans women are women, then why the hell can't women play them? Quite a contradiction in our messed up woke ideology. But it is a logical and complex problem. But hey, in these days, I think logics can sometimes be tears in the rain. Anyway, in Chilean culture, we haven't faced these problems so deeply yet. I don't know if woke culture will get here. I hope it doesn't, at least not in these absurd times. We have enough problems dividing our people already. I think we're still okay because our politicians are a bit more stupid than even yours, I guess, and they haven't noticed they can use this tool to divide us further. Thanks again for your show. The most I listen to you, the most I think you are a Weon Bacan Chilean nomenclature for cool dudes. Say hi to Tallulah and Gilbert for me. Cheers. Well, okay, here's what I have to say about that. Eventually, I think you're right. I think in the future, we will be able to not put those kinds of disclaimers. I mean, I think it's so weird for me, like, everybody wants to add these things. Like, earlier we were talking about cis males, or like, cis? Like, is that something that's been added to that? That's something I've gained in the last couple of years. I think eventually people will just consider themselves to be who they are. And, again, we're in an evolutionary period of time. We've seen incredible change. Like, I have gay friends that will tell me all the time, Rob, I never thought that I would see same-sex marriage be the law of the land. People that would say that I've had, one of my dearest friends for 30 years would probably tell me that I met at USC when I first got there. And there's a lot of people I know, especially older gay men, that can't believe it. Can't believe it. Can't believe how quickly it's become the law of the land. And I really believe that while all of this talk is going on now, I think that we are going to see in 10 years, in 20 years, all of this dialogue will settle down. But what's great, what I do love about all of this, is that people are talking about these things. Yes, do I hate my own side of the aisle? Do I hate far left cancel culture? Yeah, I think it's terrible because it's knee-jerk, reactionary, shutting discussion down. I really can't stand it. I believe in talking. But I think what's really interesting, and I'm hopeful for the future, is that this infantile state that we're all in, that everybody wants to scream and yell and get what they want, it is the beginning. It is the beginning. And cooler heads and deeper thinking and more three-dimensional approaches to problems or issues will prevail. Right now, next couple years, it's going to be a little cantankerous. I think, especially in the United States, I think the political divide in this country has become vast, and it's gasoline on the fire. I think if more moderate voices or more intelligent voices prevail, things will be better. But I do think that the fact that marginalized people of all kinds are having their voices heard, and things I think real change is at hand. And it might not be everybody wants it to happen yesterday, but I do think that it's good that whoever you are, whatever group that you belong to, the fact that people are talking, it's out in the zeitgeist, it's only a good thing for everybody in the long run. And I think I am optimistic about our future in all of this, because I think it's good. Martin Lawrence writes in. Martin Lawrence says, "Greetings and salutations, Rob. I wanted to hear your thoughts about The Predator. Not the Arnold classic, but The Predator in general. Since the first movie, we've had a real decline in quality for the poor creature. There have been glimpses of greatness, but none of the films since have been top-notch. The fight with the alien queen in AVP was pure class, but the rest of the films sucked. With comics and prose novels out there from the films could pull from, why have they caught lightning in a bottle for the second time? Anyway, I would love to get your thoughts on this. Yours sincerely, Martin Lawrence." Well, Martin, a great question. One of my favorite things in the world is from AVP Requiem. I know, you're like, what? Why would that? What I love is that you get this glimpse of the Predator homeworld. And there's like a dude sitting in this communications, bunker. A Predator's like at his job. It's like when, not Foghorn and Leghorn, but who are the two Warner Brothers characters? They go to work and they chase each other all day, and then it's like that. So you got this Predator. Because what I really think is funny about the Predator itself, one of the great, by the way, movie monsters. Great design, the face, so cool. But when we meet the Predator, basically you're meeting the Predator in the first Predator. He's like on a weekend hunt. He's gone hunting on Earth, which means he's probably, some guy who works at a plant. Maybe he's got a tech job somewhere. Who knows? But he's a dude. I assume, I don't want to, misgender the Predator, but I would assume the Predator is probably a male of the species. We don't really know gender specifics. Maybe Predators are genderless. Who knows? But the Predator, we see him at work, and he gets like the ding, ding, ding. I got to go solve a problem on Earth. There's a problem with the Predators on Earth, so let me go fix it. I just love the idea that for the very first time we have the Predator, which is introduced as a very sophisticated guy with sophisticated equipment, or maybe the Predator doesn't have. Maybe the Predator's 3 genders. I don't know, but I don't want to misgender that Predator, or dead name him. I don't want to do that either. But so you got the Predator, and remember the Predator is just what we've called him. Like maybe his name is Muscla. Maybe in his alien dialect, that's what you call him. That's what their race is, Muscla. I don't know. Could be. We don't know. But I don't even know where I came up with that. That was a word I just made up on the spot. It's good as word as any. Muscla. That's what the Predator species is, right? So we don't know. And I love the Predator, but it would be really interesting to see more of them. Like, do they have TV? And if they have TV, are there Predator sitcoms? Like, is there a Predator Seinfeld? I've talked about this for a long time. Like, what if you go watch stand-up comedy in Predatorville? Like, we know they have cities. We know they're technologically advanced. So, are there Predator gigolos? Must be, right? Does the Predator have different religions? Does it have a religion, or does it have many religions? I don't know. So I think the Predator has been shortchanged. I think we've only seen one facet of the Predator race. Although, the movie Predators had some interesting insight into that, which I kind of like. Predators. Come on, whoever thought Adrian Brody would be a hot toy? But he is, because of that movie. I don't know. So look, I like the Predator. I wish that that we see more of them. I'd like to delve more into their society and see what they're all about. But what can you do other than that? But I think the Predator needs a more definitive movie. We talked about Predator 2 the other day. I like Predator a lot, John McTiernan. I like Predator 2, and I like Predators. I don't think it's a bad movie. I enjoyed it quite a bit for what it was. This one comes from Jay Boyette. Actually, before I read Jay Boyette's letter, let me jump over and see what you lovely people are saying. What are you saying? I don't even know. Let me get back to see what you are saying. Eric Gant. I missed this yesterday. Eric Gant. Eric Sardukar Grant, because he's a Sardukar warrior. Eric says, did you hear about the proposed collaboration between Denis Villeneuve and Bryan Singer? It's a sci-fi crime drama involving the hunt for a mythic crime lord hiding on a desert planet. They're calling it The Usul Suspects. Okay, Eric. Be gone with you. No, I'm just kidding. That was actually, to be honest, that wasn't bad. That wasn't bad. All right. Not bad. That's pretty funny. But that, for me reading that aloud, better than $1. Come on, man. Willow sends in a tip and says, is Robert Downey Jr. really that bankable, though? His ventures outside the MCU, The Judge and Doolittle, haven't made money. Are there actually actors nowadays that guarantee box office success, or is it more the brands and the franchise? Willow, that is a very good question. I think that we have moved out of the age of the movie star. I think it's a combination of the two, and I think maybe it always was. Because if you go back, you can find every movie star has a failure in there, a big failure. Eddie Murphy at the height of his powers ends up in The Golden Child. The movie didn't do so well, even though I want the knife. I still like it. I still like The Golden Child. And what was it, Charlotte Lewis? I mean, show wing. But I think that I think it's a combination. You have to have the right actor in the right role. Perfect for Iron Man. But again, I think The Judge and Doolittle were movies that weren't exactly, they didn't exactly play to Robert Downey Jr.'s talents. I mean, I would go back and look at Shane Black's Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. There's an example how Robert Downey Jr. is absolutely a movie star if he has the right material. But I don't think Kiss Kiss Bang Bang was a big box office draw. But I think that no actor alone guarantees box office success. You need the actor properly cast in a great role. It's both of those things that you need. Absolutely. David Crabtree is here, sends in a tip and says, hello, David. David Crabtree, USMC, who, by the way, is a great artist, and I look forward to seeing his finished comic. David says, one of two. Happy Hump Day, Sir Rob. This week marks the 20th anniversary of The Patriot, a top 5 favorite film of mine, and my favorite Mel Gibson film. A great cast, including Heath Ledger, Tom Wilkinson, Chris Isaacs, Adam Baldwin, and Chris Cooper. I like The Patriot. Renee Auberjonois and Donald Logue, many others. With a fantastic and very underrated score by John Williams, it makes my 4th of July watch list every year with film greats such as Top Gun, Apollo 13, Armageddon, and 13 Hours. Truly an American epic. Come on, David, where's the right stuff, man? Got to get the right stuff. Otherwise, I concur with you. I think those are a good choice. Good choice, sir. I enjoy those very, very much. I like The Patriot. Roland Emmerich, Independence Day. Roland Emmerich directed The Patriot. Jason Bueno sends in a super chat and says, did you see there's a live-action Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series in the works at CBS All Access? It will adapt The Last Ronin, which is an upcoming comic miniseries. Yeah, I saw that. CBS All Access doesn't really have a great track record with me. They're about to drop the second season of The Twilight Zone, which, hope, it's got to be better than the first. Doesn't it? Please be better than the first? I hope so. Eric Trilithium Gant is back. Eric says, no shame in grabbing the Disco Enterprise. Personally, I think it's a solid design. With that being said, if you decide to pick up a Hot Toys Burnham or Disco Spock, I might have to consider unsubscribing. I will never do that. Never. But I'm glad you allowed me to come clean. Brendan Sheehy sends in a super chat and says, Keaton's Batman Present versus Hardy's Bane. I think Hardy's Bane would really kill Keaton's Batman. I really like Bane to crash a plane. And for those of you, let me find it because it is still one of the funniest things that I have ever seen on the internet. If you have not seen this, I used to think everybody has seen this. The Oral Knots, some of my favorite people, did one of my favorite things ever that's ever been on YouTube. And it's called Freestyle Bane, and you need to watch this. If you haven't, I'm putting it into the live chat right now because it is hilarious. So there you go. Eric, so I'm glad, Eric, that you, I'm happy about that you like the Enterprise. And Brendan, I hope you like Freestyle Bane. So I think Freestyle Bane is funny, and I hope you all watch it because it's awesome. Stubble McShave is here. Stubble McShave says, a friend of mine had a history of psychological issues and had cut himself in his teens. He was shown a YouTube clip by another guy. The clip featured a magician seemingly pushing a needle through his stomach. He had to seek professional help to deal with it. Yeesh. Well, I'm sorry about that, Stubble. I hope he has he's got some help with that, because you can't really push a needle through your stomach. Yeesh. That's something I don't know much about, the impulse for cutting. Unless it's Debbie Harry and Videodrome. I don't know. It's a tough one. David Crabtree is back. He says, 1 of 2. Okay, here are my favorite horror or horror-esque films. 20, Event Horizon. 19, Frailty. 18, Paranormal Activity. 17, Demon Knight. 16, Alien. Cabin in the Woods is 15. 14 is Paranormal Activity. 13 is Gremlins. 12 is Fright Night, the original. Welcome to Fright Night. For real. You have to have faith. I love when he does that. You have to have faith for this to work on me, Mr. Vincent. 11, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, Dream Warriors. 10, Jeepers Creepers. 9, Lost Boys. 8, Arachnophobia. 7, Scream 2. Scream 2. Not just Scream 1, Scream 2. 6, Shaun of the Dead. 5, The Exorcist. 4, Creepshow. 3, The Monster Squad. 2, Poltergeist. And 1, Scream. Generally, I'm drawn more toward atmospheric style horror rather than the blood and guts. Yeah, that's a very great list, a very entertaining list. Your list is definitely pop horror, although I like The Exorcist is probably my favorite horror film of all time. I really like horror films that are about existential dread more than anything else, but that is a very fine list you have. I Exist, I think, tipped and says, if you could be Commander Data, no sadness, anxiety, fear, anger, insecurity, and all uncomfortable emotions. But this means you also give up being happy, enjoyment, feeling loved, and loving others, satisfaction and success, etc. Would you make the swap? No. No, I wouldn't. The only reason I would want to be Data is because of his immortality. But the rest of it, life wouldn't be worth living. I mean, I have to tell you, there's so many things that excite me on a daily basis. I would not want to live without that kind of excitement. If I didn't have that excitement and the joy I feel about all this stuff, I don't know, man. I wouldn't dig it. Zachary King says, Rob, I watched Zardoz on your recommendation, and it was like a bad acid trip. Although I did enjoy Reanimator, so I guess I'm 1 for 2. Keep those recommendations coming, Broseph. Let me swim in your broshin, my Broseph. Yes, well, I'll tell you, Zachary, Zardoz is an acquired taste. So, I understand. It's not for everyone. 70s dystopian sci-fi is certainly not everyone's cup of tea. Yes. Emil Johansson says, Rob, you don't fit the American stereotype that disses foreign cultures and thinks Europe is a country. Much respect. No, I don't. But, it's so weird. I know a lot of... Look, the people that when I went to Europe, the only people that I disliked when I was in Europe was the Americans I met. I mean, I was in Spain and I met some people that were complaining about the food. I'm like, even I'm a picky eater, and I'm like, the food in Spain rules. Between the lamb you can get, I mean, the meals that I had in Barcelona, my God, the food, actually the food all throughout Europe, French food, Spanish food. I mean, it's Italian food. I mean, the cuisine. Come on. Then you have to go to Germany. Theater. But, hey, there's stuff, you can always live on beer. I'm sorry, no one from Germany, don't get mad. Dieter, don't get mad. I'm just making a joke. I know, Spock would say extremely little, ensign. Just, there you go. But I appreciate that, Emil. I love Europe. Europe, going all around Europe is amazing. I love how every place is different. Lancelot Narayan says, I've never met Bill Maher, but I've never liked him. We might park our shuttle in the same shuttle bay politically, but he's far too in love with his own voice. He's a bore, ignorant on comics, and as my dad used to say, an assholian. The race of assholians. That planet's dangerous. Word Balloon, John Suntress is here. And if you haven't been watching the Word Balloon podcast, man, he has been crushing it with his guests. He's been doing live streams on Facebook all the time. I mean, he has been crushing it. So tune in to the Word Balloon podcast, which is now a Word Balloon videocast. Very interesting stuff. Really great stuff. So tune in. John Suntra says, EPKs in radio, we would get a full album audio EPK that local radio stations could make into 1 to 2 hour interview specials. I remember ones with Paul Simon for his Graceland album, Billy Joel for Nylon Curtain, and Phil Collins for No Jacket Required. Well, that's cool. I didn't know people did that. That's really cool. Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, I just learned that the animated Disney Robin Hood was intended to be done in an animated Western style. They scrapped that idea but kept the Western folksy music in their animated fable. Would you have liked to see an animated Western style Robin Hood? Yeah. I think that would have been cool. I like genre pastiches like that. Absolutely. Adam Blue says the Predator in-universe name is Yautja? Good luck with pronouncing that. I didn't know that. Where does that come from? Is that canonical? The in-universe name is Yautja, the Yautja race, I guess. Cool. You know what? Maybe I should plug that into how do you pronounce that word. Why don't I do that right now? That's another thing. One of my favorite things on the internet. You know, there's things on the internet that you just never tell anybody because it never comes up. But maybe they won't have it. Maybe I won't be able to. But one of my favorite things, and like when you read a book, and there's like sci-fi or horror books or fantasy books, and there's names that you don't know how they're pronounced, but you in your mind have your own pronunciation for them. I love that. Let's see if I can figure out how to pronounce. Let's see. If I don't think I'm gonna have luck here. Hang on. Okay, I'm gonna put this in here. Let's see if it'll. Oh, come on, man. This is becoming too difficult. It seemed like a good idea at the time, and now it's really not. But I'm gonna try it anyway. One more time here. Yautja. Well, it just came up. Let's see. Wow, there's different ratings. Yaja. That's how they pronounce it. Yaja. Oh, is that? Yep. Yaja. There you go. There it was. Here you go, man. You can find out how to pronounce the Predator. Yaja. Here's the pronunciation right here, according to this place. There you go. Listen to that. I only listened to one. Oh, Yautja. That's one. Yautja is another one. Wow, okay. There's 3 pronunciations here. They all sound good to me, although I do like this one the best. Yautja's one. Yautja is another. Well, there you go. I don't know. Hey, brought to you by the Predator. So, Adam Blue, there you go. Richard said Stubble had a chat yesterday. He did? Did I not read it? Well, I can go back and see if I can find it. Stubble said, maybe this was his. Stubble said yesterday, I find it somewhat ironic that the day we learned that Joel Schumacher had passed away, we learned about the news about Batman, where Tim Burton's Batman movies may be connected to the DC universe, while Schumacher's won't. Oh, man, you got to harsh my mellow. You got to harsh my mellow that way, man. Thanks a lot, Stubble. Well, Stubble, you also have something else. With the ongoing discussion about getting it on with aliens, would you rather tongue kiss a xenomorph or a predator? Oh, well, I got to tell you, the predator looks like he has a far more inviting mouth than a xenomorph does. And, you know, for someone like myself who really appreciates somebody who knows how to use their tongue and where to put it, I'm going to pick a predator over a xenomorph any day. Now, for those new listeners are going like, wait, what? We have an ongoing debate. If we meet new species in space, would we as human beings, could you make it with an alien? Like BB Newirth in the episode First Contact, when she wants to have sex with an alien and she has sex with Riker. Or we talk about episodes like The Outcast, and if it's Octurian, it doesn't matter, right? But the ongoing joke would be, could I, like, as a person, as a human being, could I find my way to have a sexual relationship with a xenomorph? Well, aside from the fact that you probably couldn't converse, I couldn't go there. I had to admit, as a human being, I could like Delenn, a Mimbari. Come on, I could hit that, but I just getting up an alien queen. I couldn't do it. I mean, I couldn't, even as sentient as they might turn out to be, I couldn't get past the fact that they're animals. But pull it back a little bit. Gigi Edgley in Farscape, it's tough. It's a tough question. So, but since you're asking about tongue kissing, I'd rather tongue kiss a predator. Even though the mouth, it's going to be kind of weird, I just find a predator's mouth more inviting than a xenomorph's mouth. I don't see a lot of tongue action. I just see a lot of teeth action, which scares the hell out of me. So, yeah, it scares me. Jean-Luc Solo sends in a tip and says, the movie Patriot Day about the Boston bombings had all the police officers dropping F-bombs and swearing in the mundane details of their work. I'm not offended by swearing, but I wonder, do most people go through their day swearing every other word? Well, Bostonians do. I don't know, but that's a good point. I think there's a lot of swearing that goes on in Boston. And maybe especially in that particular line of work on that particular day, it might have been pretty brutal. But now I'm back to, I have a letter to read, and this letter comes from Jay Boyette. Jay Boyette. Oh, wait. Claudius is here. Claudius says, hey, Rob, can you please make your comments more appealing to the Xenomorph and Android PTS members? By the way, I'm sending you a Michael Burnham Funko Pop. Oh, you know what? I've got, look, somebody sent me, I have a Michael Burnham piece of wood, but I'll take your Michael Burnham Funko Pop. I'll put Michael Burnham on the, I'll put it on the stage here just because I'll have something to, I'll have a place to direct my ire. But you know what? I don't know if I can make my comments more appealing to the Xenomorph and Android Post-Geek Singularity members. I'm sorry if I've offended any of you. Jay Boyat's here. Hello, Rob. It's been many moons since the last time I wrote in. In fact, I had to stop tuning into your show until recently. As you may recall from my long ago letters, I'm a writer, and usually I listen to your show once or twice a week while typing up all the writing I'd done longhand. But because of the pandemic, my 3-year-old's daycare shut down, and he's been home with us. So even though I've been home on paid leave from work, things have been hectic in our little apartment. My wife has to work from home, which for months meant sitting on the floor in the hallway of our building with her laptop. You can't be an operations manager with a toddler running around. Now, the daycare's reopened, and I still have at least a month before the museum where I'm a security guard reopens. Meaning, I have a little downtime to catch up on my typing and on what's been going on with the Post-Geek Singularity. If you don't mind, I wanted to chime in on the subject of June 21st show about whether it's okay for actors to portray folks from other demographics. I have enough opinions about this to go on hour-long rants, but basically I agree with what I think Scarlett Johansson was trying to say in her interview. In a perfect world, it would definitely be acceptable for actors to portray any type of person. I personally happen to think that it's also okay here in our imperfect world, but that's another matter. Anxiety over more privileged demographics being called in to portray less privileged people reflect inequalities in the general non-showbiz world. That's why no one gets upset over the idea of a single person portraying a married person, even though they don't have the experience of being married. If married people were discriminated against for the benefit of single people, it would be different. That's why there was no outcry over Linda Hunt getting an Academy Award for playing male Billy Kwan in The Year of Living Dangerously. Men don't have to worry that women are stealing their livelihoods from us, so it's no skin off our butts to acknowledge that Linda Hunt was the perfect actor for that role, despite her character-inappropriate genitals. Being a writer, I always think of this issue first from a writer's perspective, not an actor. To me, the whole job of being a writer is to portray the experiences of people who aren't like me. What's the alternative? To never write a character who's had an experience that I don't know from the inside out? If I write a screenplay and want to do so in a politically correct way, Does that mean I have to restrict myself to only writing characters whose experiences I know, i.e., straight white middle-aged men? How does that help promote diversity? I understand that if I write a novel from the point of view of a black woman, there's a risk I may not get that point of view wrong. Or there's a risk I may get that point of view wrong. But here's the thing. It's not a sin to be wrong. It's a sin to be disrespectful and hateful, but not wrong. If I write a novel with such a protagonist and black women read it and laugh and roll their eyes and declare that I don't know what I'm talking about, then I might feel embarrassed that I did a bad job as a novelist. But I won't feel like I committed a moral failing. I'll just feel like I've got something wrong. Big deal. Part of what art is having a conversation between an artist and his or her audience. You can't have an interesting conversation if you have to relentlessly vet everything you say to make sure it's 100% correct first. By the way, another possibility in the above reaction is that I didn't get the black female protagonist wrong in my hypothetical novel. It might be that the average black woman didn't recognize herself in the character because my character is kind of a weirdo. One of the problems with the politically correct assumption is that a work of art has to accurately reflect a demographic's experience in the assumption that any demographic has one monolithic identity. That's not true of straight white men. For example, I'm a straight white man, and so is Donald Trump, and we don't see things the same way. Why would it be true of anyone else? If you read a novel with Donald Trump as a character, you wouldn't say, this writer doesn't understand us straight white men at all. I grew up in Arkansas. When I first moved to New York, I made friends with a fellow straight white guy who grew up on Manhattan's Upper East Side in $1 million apartment. And I was raised an atheist. And it occurred to me that, even though we were friends, I would have no idea how to begin telling his story. On the other hand, I would feel much more comfortable telling the story of an African-American lesbian from Little Rock. True, I've never been a black lesbian, but I still know a lot more about her than I did about my friend. I know what schools this imaginary woman went to because I was there too. I know the sort of racist things people say about her, to her face and behind her back, because I've known plenty of racists. Even though Little Rock's neighborhoods are more or less de facto segregated along racial lines, I've still been to the neighborhoods where she would have grown up and hung out there. Churches are also more or less segregated. Still, if she's from Little Rock, she probably grew up going to a Southern Baptist church the same way I did, or at worst, a Methodist one. Even after all these years in New York, I still feel like I would be able to tell the childhood story of a character like her more easily than that of a straight white male like my friend. I'd have to do some thinking and some introspection and some research, but I'd be starting from a much stronger base of knowledge. All I'm saying is that we act as if gender and skin color is the most fundamental part of our identity, and it really isn't. This letter's already too long and rambling, so I'll just tack on another quasi-related opinion. If there's a choice between, say, Bryan Cranston and a paraplegic actor, who's really a great actor, sure, maybe choose the paraplegic actor, but only if he's really as good an actor. If he really does not have the skill, but the gravitas and charm of Cranston, people assume that someone who's really had an experience would be better at portraying it truthfully. But that's just not true. Having an experience and knowing how to portray an experience are totally different things. Portraying unexperience is a talent that takes skill and training. We all have experiences all the time, but very few of us know how to portray them in a powerful way. Just one final aside regarding Scarlett Johansson. I was always annoyed at the controversy over her whitewashing Ghost in the Shell. The argument is that a Japanese actress should have been cast instead of her. But how is casting an Asian actor as a martial arts assassin, android, a blow for diversity? Asians have been getting cast as martial arts assassins for decades. That's not the niche they seek to break into. And I'm sure they can do other things. I've met hundreds of Asian people, and as far as I know, not a single one of them was ever a martial arts assassin that you know of. How about if we have more white and black women as martial arts assassins, and more Asian and black women playing roles like Pam on The Office? If some producer out there really cares about diversity, why not do, say, a rom-com with a black female lead and an Asian male lead? I think we just got that on Netflix, didn't we? Camille Nanjiani and Issa Rae, right? Anyway, thanks for letting me ramble. I enjoy the show, and I'm glad to be able to catch it again. Best, Jim Boyette. Jim Boyette, do I want to say Jim? Is your name Jim? Just Jay. I don't know. It's just Jay Boyette. It might not be Jim. I just said Jim. I could be wrong. I probably am. That was a great letter. Yes, I mean, it's certainly, I have to tell you, this has been one of the most interesting topics on the show for people to continue to write letters about. I really have enjoyed what people are saying. It's great. Here's one. This comes from John Dillon. John Dillon. That sounds like a movie character. Hi, Robert. I'm a big fan of your thoughtfulness, clarity, and sincerity within this online film community space. I'm a composer, having done a feature, a couple of video games, a few shorts, and most bragably, a major project for NASA. That's rad. As well as an ungodly amount of my own work. And as a fan of yours, I thought I might ask you if you'd like a music cue for your show or shows. You already have one, of course, but if you've never ever imagined something else, something in a different style, a different length, something that affects a theme or cue you've always loved from something else, it'd be my pleasure to work on that for you. Wow. To clarify, I'm offering to produce something for you for free as a fan. I'm not prospecting for paid work here. Getting paid to produce music full time is the dream, of course, but if you can find a medium more more voraciously consumed and fundamentally devalued in our culture, I'll buy you a bottle of scotch. Well, I should buy you a bottle of scotch. I'm adept with orchestral and electronic music arrangements, but my first love is hard rock and heavy metal. Dieter Bastian will be happy to hear that. If you'd like to hear some samples of the work I've done for media, I have a portfolio site that needs to be updated. Well, I would, and I'm going to put that into the live chat. So this is John Dillon Music. Let's see. There you go. That's my piece. Keep up the good work you do. It's been cool seeing your community of people grow over time. Let me know if you're interested in exploring the idea. John Dillon. Affordable by an impoverished musician whose teacher wife is the breadwinner or lesser. Well, John, I'll tell you what. Never look a gift horse in the mouth. The Robservations theme music, which I actually put a video up of just of the entire piece, is by Alexander Bornstein, who I met because he was the composer of Axanar, and then I brought him on a film I edited called Paradox back in 2015. That was the first film he scored alone. If you look him up, if you look up Alexander Bornstein, he has great credits. But I would love that. I mean, if you want to come up with a new piece of... The only thing I told Alex Bornstein is, obviously, I said, something like an amazing stories, Harry Potter, all-encompassing imagination, connoisseur vibe. But I wanted it to be something I could whistle. And that was it. That was all I told him. Something I could whistle. And he did like 4 different iterations of it for me. And I liked it. And that's why I've been using it on the show. But, I would say the same to you. And what really needs a piece of theme music is whining about movies. And other than the fact that it would be fun to whistle about it, but also if it had some kind of a romantic vibe to it, because Elizabeth and I do the show together, that's all I could say. But I'll tell you, if you do that and I like it, I'll play it and I'll promote it and I'll put your name on it on the channel. And I very much appreciate you reaching out, and thank you very much for the kind words. So, yeah. And I'll send you an email to that effect later. Let's see. And, Ian Samuels. He started the day. He might end the day. Rob and fellow Robservationists, I have mentioned in your chat before, but never in a letter. Here goes. I have a friend. I haven't seen them in more than 25 years, but I occasionally get a message from her. She started as a video game journalist in the 1990s before moving into reviewing TV and movies. She's now a respected movie journalist who travels the world going to conventions and mostly film festivals. Cannes, Venice, Montreal, all of them. One of the interesting things is that she regularly gets DVD review copies of films before they're released, so that she can produce an accurate review. So I received a message from her last night informing me that she is moving to New Zealand and that she mentioned 4 films she has just received review DVDs for and has watched them. No spoilers, just her one-word review on each one. Now, okay. Okay, hang on a second. All right. I mean, I'm gonna believe you, Ian Samuels. I'm gonna believe you, but I cannot believe. I find it very, very, very difficult to believe this. Very difficult to believe this. No spoilers, just her one-word review on each one. Bill and Ted Face the Music. Lovely. No Time to Die. Okay. Tenet. Excellent. Dune. Fucking amazing. I don't know. See, I'm getting all hot and bothered now because it's hot in here. She said in her normal, overly erotic way, Tenet made her need to change her knickers by the end. Dune made her make her pants wet 4 times. So if this is suitable for reading, then anytime I hear from her, I'll do a letter. To give you a previous example, she told me her opinion of the J.J. Star Trek movies and his Star Wars movies made her want to turn gay. She got wet once, and that was only because she saw who she calls Bendy Dick Cumberpatch, as he always gets her wet. Great, I'm going to get demonetized now for this video. So hopefully, not spoiling anything, and maybe even got female members of the Post-Geek Singularity moist. Ian, wow, that's a letter that you don't usually write. I don't know if I believe her though. I just can't believe that they'd be sending those movies out, especially Tenet and No Time to Die, to anyone. Now I know that does happen. I just can't. I don't know, man. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. I'm sorry. I don't trust that. I don't buy it. I ain't going, Mr. Quint. I ain't going. Not that I don't trust you, but I find this hard to believe. Anyway, let's see where we're at now. Honest Asian Guys here. Hello, sir. It seems Disney will be licensing non-brand films to other studios for home release, starting with Mel Gibson's Apocalypto, due out next month from Sam Goldwyn. I saw that. You know, my Apocalypto Blu-ray was one of my most valuable Blu-rays, and now it's, being released again, which I think is great. I wish that they would release, where's Splash domestically? Where's Ruthless People? Where's Down and Out in Beverly Hills? I don't know. So it's good to hear. Good to hear. Captain Canuck, they need to make some kind of money from that catalog. Captain Canuck is here. Canuck. Canuck. The TNG episode, The Outcast, I think. Riker has a romance with a member of a genderless species. The member identified as female. The outcast was an analogy for LGBTQ, I think. Could it have worked if it was more obvious, Riker and a man? Look, a lot of people, I've talked to a lot of my LGBTQ friends, and they have often said that they frown upon the outcast. I've heard that a number of times, which I think is a mistake. I mean, I like the outcast. I think it's a good episode. At the time, it was pretty ballsy for what they did. I understand they couldn't go that far, but still, they to do that at the time, if they had done it with a guy, they could never have got away with that. So I think what they did was really great. But see, everybody wants it to be, I want it 100%. Like, everybody has to understand, change is gradual. You can't just throw things in people's face. You have to walk it up to them. It's the old Sam Waterston joke from Capricorn 1. And if you don't know what that is, well, maybe, here, wait a minute. I'm sure it's on the internet. Maybe you can find it. Let's see. Waterston joke. Capricorn 1. When I was a kid and saw this movie in 1977, yep, here it is. Let's see, I'll get you the best one. Okay, here it is. It's in HD. Everybody, if you've never seen Capricorn 1, I mean, this is kind of a spoiler, and perhaps you shouldn't watch it. But if you have seen Capricorn 1, this is a very important way to... This is, I think, this joke is... well, it's not really a joke. It's kind of a joke. He's always telling jokes in the movie, but it's one of the most important life lessons ever to learn about how to talk to people. And I absolutely believe that. 100%. Eric 2000 Gant. I love Eric, just like Throg. Eric Gant says, the idea of sexing up a xenomorph brings to mind the song Reproduction from the cult classic Grease 2. Where does the pollen go? Nice pull. I love that. It's true, a very good point. I mean, we are living in a crazy time. I think, I think people really, we have a generation of people that really need to they need to work on their people skills. That's what I think, so they can talk to people better. Talk to people. Let's see this. Google. Jason Bueno says Google Scorn game. Scorn. Okay, I will. Scorn game. Here we go. Ooh. Wow. That's wow, that's a horror game. That looks amazing. I'll tell you something. Here, I'm gonna put this in the chat. Wow, this looks amazing. Here you go. Oh yeah, I love this. This is right up my alley. Yeah. You know what this kind of reminds me of? It's obviously Giger-esque, but you know what this reminds me of, Jason? I was working on a horror movie that I would love to make, but I couldn't get it off the ground because it was too expensive. It was after I made Free Enterprise, and it was written by Zach Stentz and Ashley Miller, who wrote Agent Cody Banks. They also wrote Thor and X-Men First Class. They wrote a script that I love. Now there's elements of it have been mulled over, so maybe not, but it was called Night. And basically it was about vampires had taken over the world, and they had divided it up into sort of, it was like feudal tribal warlords or whatever, and the only people that stood in opposition to the vampire world order were the mafia and the Catholic Church that had teamed up. And there were like these giant citadels, these huge like mile-high towers where the vampire kings of each region lived. And I love this script. But my idea for it was that hell, kind of like, because I love the Sandman, hell was actually a place. Like the afterlife, hell had an aesthetic. So like when you came to Earth, the older the creatures were, the vampire creatures, they had to have their own aesthetic. So like the vampires wore clothes, but their clothes would be, you know, made fashioned from human skin, but they were like beautiful leather, the most bespoke clothes in the world, but they were all made from the bones and skin of living creatures, mostly human beings. And the architecture, like there was a style, there was an actual architecture, because if hell was a place, and this architecture style was, it was based on decay and bones and stuff like that. And I found an artist, Bakinski, and he was, let's see if I'll put let's see if I can find it. Yes, The Fantastic Art of Bakinski. Here it is. And it's this book, and here it is, from Gallery Morpheus. And I became obsessed with the aesthetic for this movie, the vampires. Here it is. I'm putting it in the live chat. I wanted it to be, the same way that Giger was used for Alien. I wanted to use, it's Bakin. I'm sending it wrong. I just said Bakinski. I'm not probably pronouncing it right, but I've always said Bakinski. It's probably wrong. But his aesthetic, I wanted the whole horror movie to look like that. So you had Giger, which was biomechanical, but this was more decay, and I figured if hell had a landscape, it would look like this. And I kind of was thinking about the end of Lucio Fulci's The Beyond. If you haven't seen The Beyond, I mean, The Beyond, I guess, is the Citizen Kane of Italian horror, maybe. But yeah, that's kind of what it reminded me of. Christopher Morgan says, speaking of horror, have you read any of the Immortal Hulk run? I have not. I want to pick that up. I want to get the omnibus. I keep hearing about it. I have not read it. Lancelot Narian has said, I know one person who has seen No Time to Die, and they work for Universal. The director has an option to update special effects as the film is delayed, but there are no screeners available for the media. Yeah, I didn't think so. I didn't think so. There's no way they wouldn't have that. So I think Ian Samuels is pulling my leg, or he might have dreamt it. I think that was kind of the point. He was writing something funny. But yeah. Anyway, this, ladies and gentlemen, brings an end to Robservations episode number. Can you believe it? Episode number 451. My God. I want to thank, of course, Mike Bodden. I want to thank Greg Smith. I want to thank The Richard. I want to thank Haynock. I want to thank Jordy Lyons. I want to thank the entire staff here. And we're also in the market for new moderators. If anybody is interested in moderating the show, we're interested in having you. So I'll talk more about that later. We also will be back again tomorrow and the next day and the next day. I will not be back on John Campy's show. As far as I know, he's on hiatus for at least another week and a half. But it's great to have all of you. Oh, wait. Will N sends in a tip and says, speaking of sex with aliens, brought to my mind, not sure why, but it's true. I recently watched Almost Famous for the third time and never noticed Kate Hudson's nude scene. Wow. Well, Will N, you might be watching. There's two versions of Almost Famous. I don't even watch the original version. I watch the untitled version, which you can tell from the beginning credits. That's my version of choice on Blu-ray. Yeah, Kate Hudson as Penny Lane. Fantastic. That movie is one of my favorite movies of all time. I love it, love it, love it. But so thank you to the moderating staff, for all of you, and I'll be back, as I said, tonight. Sci-Fi Week on Whining About Movies continues with Alex Garland's masterpiece Ex Machina, which actually has the star of Devs in it, as well as Domhnall Gleeson and, of course, Oscar Isaac. And Alicia Vikander, how do you pronounce her last name? Vikander. Alicia Vikander. I love Ex Machina, and it is our Wednesday night movie leading up to our doubleheader, our 2-bottle of wine magnum opus of Passengers and Never Let Me Go for Romance Friday. That's right. If you want date night, you can join Elizabeth and I and watch those movies. But tonight at 7 p.m., Whining About Movies brings you Ex Machina 2014. So tune in for that. And yeah, I want to thank everybody for the kind support of the channel. And thank you for all your letters. If you want to write me letters or send me videos, please do so at the Burnettwork.net website. Now remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I bring Robservations, the show about something, to a close. Coming at you from this, the Robservatory, which is still under construction. But soon. And as always, as I always like to say, have a better day.